Welcome to episode 40 of the International Web Effectiveness Podcast, where Bill Hunt and I, Bill Scully, discuss the strategies and techniques necessary to improve your web presence and manage your global websites. Today we're going to be discussing web migrations in an AI era. But before we get into that, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you do enjoy it, please tell someone about it and leave us a quick review. The reviews help motivate us to continue to making more of these episodes. In our last episode, we spoke with the fantastic guest, Adam Gent from Indexing Insights, and we dug into the state of indexing and why it should be a critical part of your search efforts. In this episode, we're going to be talking again about the topic of website migrations for an AI era. And I have to say, when we talked about this topic, I thought, this is going to be typical migration stuff, which, a lot of people make mistakes with, and we've done lots of successful ones, but this really got my brain going. So, why don't you tee this thing up and talk about how these differences in LLMs and search affect migrations?
Sure. We put this spin on it because, we both remember, as you said, the days when migration struck fear in the hearts of SEOs, because we probably found out about it after the fact or a couple days before. And what's interesting is, in all of this craziness of AI, I haven't seen anything about migrations. And so I thought, wow, it's odd that Bill wants to talk about migrations when nobody cares about them anymore. We're all doing our thing. So as we start thinking about, is there anything different in the AI environment that we should think about? I think all the other things are true, right? That are we able to transfer the equity that we built up on the old pages to the new pages? Can we get the pages re-indexed? Can we recover any traffic we lose? And that's what you alluded to, is a successful migration to us is when we don't lose any of the value that we had before, and hopefully through the refresh, whatever reason we're doing a rebuild or a migration or whatever reason, that it's additive, that we actually gain. And so as I started thinking about this, and it actually came out of some research I've been doing around why hreflang isn't working, and we'll circle back to that later, and I think our next episode we're going to talk about that specifically. But one of these was, if we're launching this new content, the idea that it's new, it's fresh, it's freshly being seen, it could, by the very nature of it being newer, having stuff that maybe isn't in another market, could impact our performance in a way we may not have even considered. And what I mean by that is that before, when we deploy a new page, for whatever reason, it's new page, we always monitor, did we lose rank and did we lose traffic? And I think the same thing is true, but in this time, I think is what I'm calling it, are we losing the narrative? Meaning, if we've materially changed, and we know if we materially change the content on a page, like when we went through the phase of content grazing, where we would take 5 paragraphs of content and the UX, the smarter UX people, the PhD would walk in and say, guys, this is better with 5 bullets because nobody can read anymore. We need 5 bullets instead of 5 paragraphs. So all the goodness that benefited us, that content went away. And we could point back to, hey, we lost the content that was either a good a good description, a snippet. And so I think the same thing happened now. So the question is, if we materially change our content, are we losing citation eligibility? Are we losing the very piece of content that in a RAG model or in a, in-memory model was the very piece of content that made us stand out? I think a second thing too is, when we make a material change, are we now changing the data or the insight, and maybe what the LLM has stored is now old data? So maybe old data is still being shown, because remember, And as we've tried to explain to people, there's 2 points of ingestion, 2 points of action, 2 points of presentation. One is in memory. And the first thing all SEOs ranted about with AI search was, look at the model. The last time it was updated was 18 months ago. So everything it has is 18 months old. Don't use it. It's old, outdated crap. Then the second piece is RAG, which is the new stuff. So when we say, what's the best running shoe for 2026, clearly an 18-month-old, data set is not going to have anything about 2026 running shoes. So that's where RAG comes in. So it can be the fact that it hasn't updated on your new content. And so it's a whole nother problem. And so can the LLM get to this new stuff? Because remember, they're not crawling like Google.
Right. Yeah, I the line here, search engines can recrawl and re-rank. Language models don't work that way.
Exactly. And so if we're,
I know you've done a bunch of research on this. Let's say that there's a source of truth. There's no need to do a fan out. The old site doesn't exist anymore, and you have redirects set up. It's going to be using the old content for its answers. Do you know, would they continue to get a link back to the old site?
No. So I'm going to say possibly, because any crazy stuff can happen. So if we think about it from an LLM perspective, the moment that cluster or chunk is parsed out, it loses, for all practical purposes, any connection back to a URL. It is now a block of fact, a block of information, especially when we're talking about in-model responses, right? And so that it loses any connection back to that. Now, if there's a RAG thing, meaning it's went out and fetched something recently, or if it believes that this data is still cool to it, it still answers the question, like your point is, it will still cite the old content because it has it. And then the question is, if it tries to fetch it because it knows this is a good place to go get it, from what I've seen, LLMs will not and do not follow redirects. So it won't go follow, because again, it didn't store necessarily the source of where it got that. It just put it into its data set. So doesn't necessarily have a link to follow to go represent that as Google may do. It's either going to go out and try to fetch it. Okay, it knows of this resource. That resource is no longer there. It's not going to follow redirect, go to the new one and refetch it. It's just not going to do that. I can't find any evidence that happens.
Right. So that makes it really important to get the first new page done right, because it may never pull that page information again.
That's true. And if there is a material change, like, when we have old product and new product may have different material, different specs, different sizes, different features. And so, again, if the query is nuanced to where it's looking for new information, and especially if you put in a brand, like if you put in Lenovo for anything dealing with a computer, it's going to go to Lenovo predominantly, right?
Yeah.
So we're not losing everything, but when there's no brand affinity, when we're asking a broader question where any brand could be a result, I think we run into this as being it. Now, one thing I want to introduce, because this is the International Web Mastery, which we're going to get to, is what market now is the source of truth, right? And I want to really dig into this a little bit later, but that's a whole nother thing. What page is the source of truth? Now, if you launch a new market before, let's say you launch, and there's a case we're going to talk about in our next episode where Norway updated their content, Google's AIO system fetched it, and because the query fan out was looking for the newer technology, it actually used the grounding from Norway as opposed to the US. So this creates a whole new dynamic. which we'll talk about a little bit later because there's a couple of these other, nuances. But I want to circle back to this redirect. They still make sense to do them. But, the RAG, from what I've seen, what I've researched, I spent a couple of hours in all the different LLMs asking these questions. I looked for examples from some sites that had recently been updated. I couldn't find any case where it had followed a redirect, even when I was looking for, say, a 2025 version of a product versus a 2026. And so everything I found was this total disconnect of the embeddings being disconnected from any live URL is the better way to put it. So these vectors were put into the database, and in a way, anything that was in the original model, like those facts that aren't necessarily date and time space factor. An interesting thing I came across was the numerous mentions of how these systems build their corpora, or their database, and it was at the burden of Common Crawl. And I can't find any way to really affect Common Crawl, which is this big, massive crawl repository that is out there crawling. And I don't know if you've seen some of the latest things some of the publishers have been complaining about Common Crawl, and I know Cloudflare has been all over this because Common Crawl does not respect robots' text.
Right.
They're just out there crawling away like a rogue bot. And so since a lot of these LLMs use Common Crawl, it's an interesting dilemma, and there's no way to feed it. It doesn't necessarily use XML sitemaps. And there's another article I just wrote that I published it, but I didn't promote it. It was a little bit geeky about, sort of my rant against Cloudflare is there has to be some hierarchy of whether or not we go get it. I think there was a guy posted it. He's the one that's been writing about a lot about LLMs lately. He wrote about context, like content hierarchy, that every piece of, basically he said citation. The number one thing that was cited in LLMs from his research was like Facebook. Then number two was like Reddit. And then number three was Wikipedia. And he basically said these are highly influential sources. And I sort of counter disagree because I think the context of the queries people are doing, these made sense. What if I was a researcher doing something on health? I would never expect to see any one of those three be the most cited. I'd expect WebMD or, Medline or something like that. Yeah. So again, I think
that's probably like a correlation to the type of queries, right? They're more comparison queries, like what's the best pickleball paddle? There might be a lot of people writing stuff about that on Facebook.
So to get back to this redirect thing, one thing I would recommend, jumping ahead to recommendations for folks, is I think we should look at, as everybody's jumping on all the AI, scoring tools and ranking tools and prompt tools, we want to look and see, when in the grounding references, does the different LLMs swap out? Just like we used to do in the old days. Remember the model we used to do for some mutual clients? We would do we'd redirect old page to new page. And so we used to use, there was a report that you've mastered in Data Studio where we would get the old URL that was ranking, and then we could take that word and see the new URL, and we could load in our old URL to new URL redirect model and basically say, not only is the new URL in, but did the old one get replaced by the new one? I don't know if that makes sense to people hearing it. I see the picture in my head, but, keyword, old URL ranking, keyword ranking today, same, better, worse. And then did it get swapped out? Did the best ranking URL actually get swapped out by where we wanted it to go to? Right. So we built that model that, interestingly enough, I couldn't give away to people. But it's the same thing now, right? We want to see, did the grounding reference for something related to us post-migration, did that change?
Right.
Right. And that answers your question. did the grounding reference, meaning is Google or is whatever LLM referencing the new reference over the old reference?
Right, right. And you'd have to have a tool in order to do that, unless you did it manually, which I think manually, well, even not manually. I mean, there were, I don't know. I don't have direct experience with measuring all that stuff, but I've had lots of demos and I've been working with the client to try and pick one. And I think the tools will be great to see if the correct information is being displayed, but there is a lot of personalization that's going on.
But I think, let's simplify it for people. Let's just say, so before I was going to Tiger's Nest, I was looking at potentially new hiking shoes and boots. And so as I was doing this analysis, there was one that kept coming up. It's the one that I was preferring, but I tried it on and I didn't particularly feel comfortable with it. And then they came out with a new version like 3 weeks before I left. And what was interesting is when I was looking for this, I happened to notice that it did start in some of the messaging, the new claim to fame starting to show up. And that's what I mean by simplification. If we're saying our shoe is 22 ounces and it's Gore-Tex waterproof, maybe that's the new statement. It's not great from a marketing standpoint, but just work with me here. Right? A simple statement. If before it was simply saying it's 36 ounces, it wasn't Gore-Tex, and maybe it's not new polymer material, right? It's an old statement. If when we do a query on that shoe or shoes that have similar feature functions, did the statement quoted generically, as if we were doing it in incognito to take out any person, that first net new query, mm-hmm. Did what is being presented for your product adapt to the new terminology, technology, feature function set? That would be an interesting test, right?
That would be
because and so one of the things, so quick plug for Milestone. Milestone just launched their Geo tool. And the one thing I liked about it is they came to market not necessarily as a Me Too, check your AI rankings, but they really were positioning it as is there incorrect information?
That's the tool I'm looking for.
Right?
That's really how I think these tools should be used.
And so what they're doing is they've got a series, they or anybody, let's just keep this tool neutral. If you were as a customer were to load in maybe some statements or some prompt, I got to figure out what the right word for this. So some stuff. A set of text that represented you and you wanted to see if it's correct or not. Like one we're seeing every geo workshop I've done. One of the top 3 questions is how do we detect incorrect information? And more importantly, how do we get rid of it? And so I tell them, well, you can only detect incorrect information if you're actually comparing what's correct to what's incorrect. How do you source the incorrect? So you either got to ask a broad question that's something about you, like where is our headquarters, or what is our mission statement, or whatever you think might be inferred incorrectly. In this case, might be, are our hiking shoes waterproof? Right. And if it comes back and says, no, they're not, or no, they don't use Gore-Tex, which is actually a brand name, but then okay, then we know it's got incorrect or non-current information. So I think if we pepper some prompts to potentially, you're the prompt master, not me, but if we write some prompts to potentially ferret out inconsistent, incorrect, incomplete, irregular data, we can actually see what's returned and then just do a simple delta, lookup. Did it say X or did it say Y? And we can find it. And I think that's the interesting thing, sort of point 3 I had for this, getting back to this episode, was every migration event effectively publishes a new version of this information. And so it's not like we could with Google, hey, let's submit this through Search Console to get fetched.
Yeah.
Google would come get it and we could see 48 hours, right? Come get it. dangle a carrot, hey, the checksum has changed, come refresh it. We're at the mercy of either A, in-model training, or B, a RAG trigger. And this has got me thinking is, in this content, can we, and this gets back to this same guy, I got to think of his name. He come out with the thing saying, put this block in your blog where people can click it and it actually like submits it to the LLM, some question to the LLM. You know who I'm talking about. I think he's Turkish or Romanian. Anyways, he built that module for your blog that when you click it, it's sort of a pseudo submission / prompt question to ChatGPT. And the idea was that if you prompt this, it would effectively ask the ChatGPT to go fetch something related to this post. Again, I'm just sort of brain dumping now that maybe there's 10 critical pieces of information that's changed that we probably want to prompt the LLMs to come figure it out. So is there and I'll get his name and I'll put it in the show notes, but can we come up with, like, using his methodology to pre-prompt, if we will? Can we physically go out and ask a question that might stimulate that new information as the answer? So maybe the shoes that I like were the Merrill Moab Gen 3, right? If I went out and said, break down the features of the Merrill Moab Gen 3 hiking shoes, right? That in theory would prompt a series of RAG prompts to Merrill to get their updated data. And does that seed it into the corpus or not? I don't know. So if smarter people than me will test that. But it is, what if that would work? And so can we, when we do a migration, and especially, or even better, like going back to my days of working with New Balance and Asics, and a big problem we used to have is we'd launch a shoe in America for the New York Marathon. And then the next thing you know, we'd have a market like Australia, the UK, bitching that, how much traffic they were losing to the US because the US had the new shoe, which they introduced the day before at the marathon. It's not even available in the other markets. So when it was eventually available, all the link equity and everything was to the US. So Google was ranking the US page over the Australian page for the new model of marathon or ultra marathon running shoe. So again, it's one of these things that maybe there's a pre-seeding or an immediately after migration seeding we can do to get the LLMs to ingest this. Again, thinking out loud. I mean, this is like a Mike King type research project.
You could like do a search like, what do you know about Bill Scully SEO?
There you go.
And do a deep search, and 20 minutes later, tell you I'm a coach.
The most brilliantest SEO out there, yeah. But like that, I mean, people have been doing this. This was the thing a lot of people have poo-pooed that, Will Reynolds and those guys all, this works brilliantly well is, you create one of these, top 10 lists or whatever, you seed it with yourself and you put it in your footer, and the next thing you know, it's gospel in an LLM. So maybe, let me think out loud. Maybe this is a step we should try. We do a migration. Maybe it's a product refresh, even a product launch. We create a claim to fame page. So similar to the Bill Scully, world leading SEO, your claim to fame of what you've added for this. We then do a prompt asking for it. And maybe that seed page that sort of paraphrases all the goodness we just deployed across n number of pages, that then can act as a catalyst for getting it indexed. I don't know. I think pivoting to the next one, the counter is true, right? What if we did a deployment and we updated a lot of stuff? We launched a new gen of a shoe or a product and everything is still referencing the old stuff. I think because there's not been anything to force a refresh. Again, it's not like Google, coming in and banging a page 9 times after it's been relaunched to know that the stuff has changed. We've still got the embedded stuff. We've got content and content crawl. So it can live almost in perpetuity until there's something that forces a refresh of that. Again, I think I'm overgeneralizing and over specifying around product information because that tends to change the most frequently.
Yeah, but actually, I have a migration coming up where a company is being absorbed by another brand, and I wonder how long it will take for the LLMs to catch up with the product being associated with the new brand. Because you have 20 years of information out on a web describing the product being associated with the old brand. Now we're going to have one page to start with in the migration saying that the product is associated with the new brand.
Just gave me an idea. So I'm working with a company that has a solution that I just come up with a new use for their solution
Okay.
to this. So thank you. I'll give you credit for it. Let me answer one way we might be able to do that. So in helping these guys, I've been digging a lot into schema. And one thing with schema that I'm finding is we've got 99% of SEOs saying schema has no material effect on LLMs. And then we've got 1%, typically the people selling schema or the SEOs that are still attached to schema or have recently done a schema deployment that are adamant that it materially does do it. And I'm in the neutral zone, right? I can advocate both sides.
But you have to say that Google uses it, right? And
right? Google use it. Here's how everybody cops out to this, right? Here's how everybody makes the connection. So Google uses it. But we know that Google's systems are probably the most, we've ranted. We did a whole episode about how dysfunctional Google's systems are between crawl and rendering and duplicates and serving. And so imagine how wired they are, with all the new AI stuff, because, why would the AI people talk to the mere mortal crawl people? So I'm skeptical of this, but I'm with you. But let's take the nuance farther. You wanted to know how we might be able to influence these. Here's where I'm seeing this. And so I see the cool people referencing same as. And here's how I just wrote a model for this company, right? You're seeing it, right? So think of it as a bow tie. LLMs want fact, and they're using fact-based sources, right? So Wikipedia, everybody points to that. I'm a fan of Wikidata, Wikibase.
Wikibase.
I've only written this like 9,000 times in the past 3 weeks. Wikidata. The one Google is put like $250 million in. Wikidata. The reason they like databases. So here's one thing I've been telling people to do. Same as works. So this is your scenario, right? We're doing a acquisition, and it's a standard acquisition model, right? We say they're a XYZ company now. Then the next thing you know, like you said, very risk aversely, we took the 1,000-page website and now it's jammed into one page, and good luck, we own you now. So you're ours, and who cares about the old brand? Here's where I think we need to do something. We need to go back to these databases, because I've been working with some models around, I'm calling this entity lineage. Because what I'm finding is some very real problems where companies use the trade name, but they're known as legally a different name. Mm-hmm. Right? Let's take Absolute, right? Absolute colloquially would be known as Absolute or Absolute Vodka. Their legal name is the Absolute Company. Mm-hmm. Two different entities. What does Wikibase and what does Wikipedia have? And I think Wikipedia tends to mirror whomever set it up. If a PR person set it up and they went with the trade name, it's probably Absolute. But Wikidata is probably the Absolute Company and a reference to either the trade name or a trademark or a DBA as Absolute or Absolute Vodka or something like that. What we're finding is when we have this conflict between trade name and an operating company name, we have to make the connection. That's my bow tie. There's an entity in the middle. There's public databases, everything from the SEC to state registered
Dun&
company
Bradstreet,
database,
there's all
trademark Dun and Bradstreet,
Yeah.
Wikipedia, Wikidata, all referencing the company.
Yep.
And then over on the other side, we've got the website. We've got all the public references, all mentioning this. And so what I would do, if I were you, I would make sure every place we can submit a change references the acquisition, references that the company that got acquired or absorbed is now part of that parent. I would go, if their website is still available because they're in that transition period, I would update the schema and back to the Google side of this, that this company is now has a parent of, the parent of reference in the organizational stack of this. So that's at least on the Google side going to acknowledge this parent-child relationship now. So we're acknowledging it. And this is one thing I found in some research when we were looking at this, that when all the public databases say one thing, and then your moment of truth in schema, because it's funny, I did this on an industry. I can't even say the industry. I looked at 27 companies in the industry, and only one of them had a true trade name to organization name hierarchy established on their website. And of the 27, 12, their all public information was the trade name, like all the databases, and then all the front end marketing. So Facebook, Wikipedia, all the socials were all the trade name. So there was a complete disconnect. And then when we looked at the knowledge graph, those 12 that had the disconnect had a disconnected knowledge graph, meaning Google was showing the trade, the business name, official business name as the knowledge graph and not the trade name. So there was a little bit of confusion in the marketplace. So what I'm saying is, for you, this is a great version of a migration. It's one of the nuances that never gets talked about, both acquisitions and divestitures, which we've actually written a module in our new course. I'm putting on my Bill Scully marketing genius hat. We've actually been working on a course for site migrations where we go through the similar steps no matter what your migration definition is, and then unique things. I think there's 12 unique scenarios where there's some different action like this, an acquisition, a divestiture, a joint venture, all those. So anyways, getting back to what you were saying, that's what I would do, is I would use schema, create the parent-child relationship, start adapting their entity lineage, go to all these public databases, which LLMs do get their data from, make sure the parent-child lineage is updated there, and then circling back to our kumbaya moment, make sure that we're adapting this for the Google, because again, we know many of these LLMs actually source their information from the Googly. So yeah, I think we can. So again, I think this is what I'm basically saying is we need to think about this a little bit differently. It's the same but different. So just like we're checking rankings post, as we said, we should be checking AIO references, LLM references, to see when the new content piece gets picked up, especially if it's a materially different change. Entity-wise, does the entity change? Maybe you move. I mean, look at all the businesses because of this California tax proposal. I mean, all the, Google founders that said, hey, we're moving all of our businesses to Texas. Yeah. So a lot of companies have moved. So have they updated these data sets?
I want to remind people of our free Facebook group where we use that as an opportunity to discuss these things, and you can ask any questions you want. You could also suggest ideas for upcoming podcasts. You can find that by searching International Web Mastery Free Group.
The last thing I want to talk about, again, this is an interesting point, is I think migration failure may be harder to detect in this new environment because the zero-click impact, right? We would know if a migration failed within days.
Yeah.
The big one is when all the pages disappeared because some knucklehead failed to remove the robots block.
Yep.
The second one is when, the developers lied and said they did 100% redirects one-to-one, and they rolled that back the day before to no redirects or partial redirects, or we've got 7 hops. All those things gave us a clue because we could see within a week, typically in Search Console, the nosedive in traffic. I think it's going to be harder to detect now because we don't have as strong of a traffic signal that we had. I think rankings may still look fine, but what's the impact on the AI overviews? And like we said, is there a way that we can sort of push the goodness in and see that? I don't know. Anything you're thinking about from why we may not see an impact as much because of AI?
Well, I think it's going to be hard to have an immediate impact, right? So you migrate, you're still competing with an existing model. That model doesn't get updated. I don't have I don't focus so much on that except for the errors. And I think that if you do a good job with creating content semantically for the user as a typical SEO, I think you get the benefits of being included in the AI. I mean, it's certainly not going to be, days that you're going to see changes. It'd be interesting to see what happens. Like, do you drop out and then does it take a while to come back as new?
It's an interesting test. I think maybe it's the depth of material change. That's the sort of legal mindset, that word, material change. But
so if you just, like, another example, like what if you, in this case, the site's going to be completely different because you've been going to be tacked on and integrated. But what if you were changing your company name? Like, what if it was a domain change? It'd be really interesting to see what happens in the AI overviews. Like, I don't pay for a tool to track that, so I don't track that. But it would be really interesting to take maybe some key pages and see what's working before the migration and what's working after. Like, that would be a really good experiment because all I'm doing right now is I'm worried about traffic.
And I think, so, if we step back and we think about some of this, I think, one of the things that we're talking about is, I think you nailed it with this whole point of inclusion. So let's work through the scenarios, right? The one thing we wanted to do, we hoped that whatever we did on the new site, so let's just stay on your piece. We've absorbed a company. We've acquired them. All their assets now become our assets. So it means we probably had a domain change. Their legacy domain has now been redirected and absorbed into the existing company. So can both traditional Google and new Google or LLMs understand this? Did we lose any content that was driving AI overviews? This is my bugaboo with acquisitions, and I've ranted about this, that I saw how many brilliant companies were devastated. Every company I've ever worked with where 10,000 pages of content became one page as a tool or a solution on their mega site. So they want to know, why did the leads dry up? Well, all the shit we had to drive leads is gone.
So the reason they were acquired, it's
who thunked it, right? Yeah. And that's a whole nother one where we created process, definitely at IBM, we integrated this into the acquisition work stream. And then I've worked with some private equity when they've done it recently to try to preserve this. But that's number one is, what did we buy? And I think it's a whole different scenario with an acquisition because the acquirers are giddy at the acquisition. I mean, this is my rant about brand marketing companies. When they buy a brand, like, when somebody buys like Brooks Brothers, they're so giddy about being able to acquire the legacy brand Brooks Brothers, and then they carve it up into markets and sell it to the highest bidder. And they make their money off getting the $5 million or $10 million a pop per market. They really don't care what happens to it, right? And I think this is what happens in acquisitions. We're so giddy about the hunt and winning the acquisition and making them in that we don't think about it. And this is one thing I loved about Michael Dell is that post-migration, post-acquisition, he always made sure that all of that knowledge was dumped into site search and was dumped into the website to preserve the equity that was behind that. And he's the only senior executive I ever met that really cared about that. The whole, as you said, the legacy of why we bought them. So I think that's an interesting one. But if we pivot it to, let's say we replatform from, say, Marketo to Shopify, nothing changes except the sort of engine.
Yeah.
Obviously we've got URL changes, we've got template changes per se, but the same page is probably there for the most part. The content's there for the most part. So that didn't materially change. Now we've got potential crawling issues, which is sort of a moot point with LLMs, especially on the RAG side of this, right? They can still fetch it if the domain stayed the same, if they materially know you make it. But when we have a significant change in content, like when we go from 30 pages to, because I'm seeing a lot of people now talking about compressing content. I think there was this one maybe from Wix or somebody about how they went from somebody went from 3,000 pages to 30 pages and in a particular vertical, and their traffic tripled. And so I think people are going to start doing more of that. But what did we lose? And I think this is to your point. If we're not monitoring what is showing up in AI overviews, we may not know what content contributed to it. Because in traditional search, we could run that report that we built where we could get 30,000 rows of data out of Search Console and look at the words in the page and say, wow, okay, that page is gone. And so all the content associated with that page, either A, migrated elsewhere, or B, is now gone. So we could see why we lost that traffic. I think in AI overviews, we don't have the same luxury unless we pay a small fortune to write prompts to see that in AI tools.
Point. I mean, you would have to have thousands of prompts, which would cost you tens of thousands of dollars. But you could, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, pull from GA4 the referrers and see what pages are driving traffic from.
So let's noodle on this. Maybe let's do an episode of how we might be able to check this without breaking the bank. My other one is I'm all about what are we known for? What can't we lose? Right? It's always interesting when you ask people like my whole site migration model. I mean, I built the tool, and I mean, I literally, when I was shutting it down because I was out of the migration world, I could not give it away because nobody wanted that rigor of even doing a data-driven, what must we save scenario, right? They're like, I don't want, who's going to collect that data? What nut job is actually going to look at 14 variables to weight pages?
Pay me for the task and I won't tell you what happened.
And yeah, exactly. Right. Just migrate it, or we're going to pick and choose based on our, but the idea was maybe we can allocate 10 precious prompts to something material. What is the biggest thing we don't want to lose? Right. What is our claim to fame?
Put a different spin on it. Like, I guess you would have to worry about it for the migration, but that's a great question. What do you want to be known for on the web?
And what are you known for? And is it accurate?
Right.
And is it still there post-migration? Post-change event. We've been trying to figure out a word because it's more than just a migration in the truest sense. But anyways, if we move into a wrap up, some things, I think we've given some great tips for folks. But, one is, like you said, go into GA, do that filter to see what traffic is coming to you from LLMs today. Let's make sure you didn't lose that content in the migration event. I think 2, let's, just brainstorm, spitball, what are the 10 things would be devastating if we weren't known for on the web. Make sure that you're still known for them, that they exist somewhere. They're still, God forbid, we think about the existing non-AI version of Google, that it's still driving for many people 90% of their traffic. So I think all the things we used to think about with migrations is still true. I just think, putting in the AI era flavor may hopefully bump it up on people's priority, because I'm actually pulling data now for one that the team was given 2 days to do the migration because they're losing FY 2025 funds. So they're going to migrate as much as humanly possible in the next 2 weeks. And actually came to me and said, Bill, can you create your magical model of what we must migrate and what we need to make sure we transfer? And, can you limit it to 100 pages? So very interesting how people approach this. But any other tips you have from your experience? I love this migration, this acquisition migration challenge, and I think we should do a dedicated episode. But anything else off the top of your head?
I guess I would ask, how could a brand protect itself from being replaced in the AI answers? So, like you said, you want to make sure that you're not cutting back on all of that great content that might not be driving traffic, but is showing up in AI overviews. And we need to rethink. Fixing rankings is temporary, but fixing the narratives in AI is going to be forever. So rankings change, narratives probably don't, unless you've screwed it up.
Right. And hopefully they can come quick. But I think I want to test this, this idea of doing prompts to trigger a RAG visit that see if that materially changes what it knows about you, especially around product launches and stuff. That'd be an interesting test. So cool. I think that's all we got. We beat this to death. We've already got an idea for a couple other episodes. And so I guess this is our time to plug people to tell us what they want to hear about and problems they're having that we can hash through, and guests we can have to potentially help them get through this uncharted territory.
Yeah, we've talked to some people recently and gotten some great feedback. If you're enjoying the show, we really appreciate it if you could take a moment and rate and review the podcast on your favorite platform. And Bill and I are on LinkedIn and Twitter and Substack. And if you like these topics, please connect with us. For all episodes and transcripts, you can visit internationalwebmastery.com/podcast. And as a final thought, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a link to a Looker Studio report that will show you all of your LLM traffic that you can download and run yourself.
Love it.
Thanks,
cool.
Bill.
Yep. See you next time.
Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying hreflang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there.